Ballots counted after 6 weeks of voting in India, and we're talking landslide. Narendra Modi's Hindu nationalist BJP extending its majority after a general election that saw voters punish the once mighty Congress party of Rahul Gandhi. We'll ask why. 5 years ago, Modi promised toilets over temples, development before religion. Now, with a stronger accent on identity issues, what policies lie ahead for a fast-changing nation of 1.2 billion? What upheaval still to come for the two-thirds of the population that still live in rural areas? As for Modi, how does he wield his enhanced clout, both at home and with neighboring rivals, such as Pakistan in the wake of renewed border tension in disputed Kashmir, and China, currently in a showdown over trade with Donald Trump's United States? How does India play its cards on the world stage going forward? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Modi's landslide. With us, France 24's Leela Jacinto. How are you?
Good to be with you.
Great to have you back. BJP supporter Pradeep Singh is with us as well. Nice to see you again.
Pleasure again.
From London, journalist and documentary filmmaker Saloni Saraf joins us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And from Washington, Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director of the Wilson Center's Asia Program. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks. Good to be here.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Before we go to our panel, well, let's go to New Delhi. France 24's Delano D'Souza joins us. Delano, you got to go back to 1971 and Indira Gandhi to see the kind of landslide for a sitting prime minister that is unfolding. We can call up the numbers. The latest count were more than 300 MPs for the BJP, and that's not even counting allies.
Clearly, there is no anti-incumbency feeling in India, something the Congress party was hoping for, the BJP handily winning a majority over its rivals. You know, the Congress party losing seats in constituencies which they've held for years. Rahul Gandhi lost his seat in Uttar Pradesh, and he managed to get one seat in the Indian state of Kerala. So we had really a showing of force from the BJP, something we did not expect. The polls were pointing to a BJP victory with a lesser margin than they had back in 2014. What happened today, nobody was expecting, not even the Prime Minister himself, I feel. But the BJP clearly coming out on top, managing to change a narrative during the course of this election from everyday issues, jobs, unemployment, to national security. And we had those cross-border airstrikes which helped change that narrative.
Cross-border airstrikes in Kashmir changed the narrative during the campaign, but you get the feeling, Delano, it's about more than just what's going on India's western border. There's Narendra Modi is part of a broader trend we see where people want a strong leader.
They want a strong leader, but Narendra Modi has also capitalized on this, this right-wing nationalism, Hindu nationalism. We do have members of the BJP who have won today seats, who have been accused of terrorism, for instance, and who openly say that, India is a country for Hindus, not for Christians, not for Muslims. So, there is this wave, there is a Modi wave that is clear to say, there's no denying it. But also, we must remember that the Prime Minister put out a tweet earlier today talking about how there needs to be inclusion. That was very important, I think, for Narendra Modi to say, because he needs to tell the people of this country to unite them, because the minorities right now, they're not very happy with what's happening.
Let's listen to the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, who spoke to party faithful in Delhi earlier.
My dear countrymen, you have voted for India. You have fulfilled your duty with plenty of might and spirit. In 2014, you didn't know me at all, but you put your trust in me. In 2019, having got to know me a little better, you've given all of us strength.
More broadly, and you touched on it with that tweet earlier, Delano. What was Modi's tone when he spoke to the faithful at BJP headquarters earlier?
I mean, clearly he's very excited that the Indian people have restored their faith in him, giving him this hefty mandate which he now has. But the Prime Minister does have his work cut out for him because, as I said before, during the campaign, he succeeded in shifting the conversation from everyday issues to national security. But now, as Prime Minister, he's going to have to confront that. You know, India has the highest unemployment rate in 45 years under his watch. People aren't getting jobs. We're talking about engineers. We're talking about people with MBAs. These people are not finding jobs. People are taking their own lives. The Prime Minister is going to need to address these pressing issues if he wants to see India go forward, bring back what he pledged back in 2014, Acha Din, or the good times for everyone, development, because people on the ground, they're not seeing that.
All right, Delano D'Souza reporting live from Delhi. Many thanks for joining us in the France 24 debate. Pradeep Singh, everybody can point at numbers, right? So on the one hand, you've got growth figures, and they've been great over the last 5 years. India outpacing China even.
Yep.
On the other hand, Delano points it out, those unemployment figures.
Look, there is a much larger issue here as far as Modi is concerned. And that is, he has this tremendously empathetic communication with the people that he has been doing very, very frequently, whether it is in terms of campaign stump speeches, or it's by radio every month, or by other kinds of interaction. So what he has been able to develop in last 5 years is that when he talks, people have developed a great sense of faith in what he is planning to do and his intentions, more than the statistics. In fact, during the campaign, there were some people who were asked, some poor people in the remote areas, that, look, you have no job. So are you complaining against Modi? And they said, look, the job problem has been there forever. Whether it was the earlier Congress governments or the BJP governments, none of them have been able to help the situation greatly. This problem has been there. Yet, we want to vote for Modi because we trust in his direction. That's a very interesting way of looking at it.
So it's not about the economy.
Exactly. And, economists can hold me or rake me through the coals, but it is not about the economy. And I agree with Pradeep. I think what happened in the lead up to these elections, there was a lot of focus on the economy. Understandably, I think we almost look at these things through the prism of Western Europe and North American standards of it's all the economy stupid. But what we are obviously seeing is none of those statistics and figures really had any resonance. Farmers' suicides, high unemployment rates, a demonetization policy that really affected the poorest of the poor, it didn't stick. Because I think what we are seeing really, Francois, is really the culmination of a gradual process. This is a process that has begun decades. It picked up steam in the early 90s, and it went full throttle under the past 5 years of Modi's administration. And that is really the cultural battle, which is at the heart of this Modi phenomenon. So, last election in 2014, we were talking about, the different bases of support for Modi, the pro-business support, who are not necessarily hyper-nationalist. And I feel that these results have really laid bare the fact that this is a cultural issue. And you're absolutely right. In terms of the economy, we can quibble over the figures here and there. Under the Congress years, there was galloping growth rate, as there was in China. It was part of the global trend. So under the BJP, yes, there was a growth rate, but it wasn't as high. But these things almost don't matter anymore because the Indian electorate has obviously shown that they respond to what was an agenda to have what they call a Hindu Rashtriya, a Hindu state, a Hindu nation.
But even the Hindus amongst themselves are divided. They're not all of the same mind when it comes to the relationship between politics, identity, and religion.
Well, one smart thing that the BJP has done is unite the Hindus, or try to unite, a very vast section of the population against an enemy, the other. And the other is, as they themselves say, people who follow religions that were not started in India. So, they looked upon as foreigners. So and this is not unique to India at all. You see this in all populist movements right now. Once you have the other, then it's that much easier to have the majority. So now you're talking about 80% of the population. So even in terms of electoral math, that's very strategic.
Yeah, and it's bad for the opposition when, as Delano D'Souza pointed out earlier, its leader loses his own seat in parliament.
I want to say that today is not the day for me to go into the details of this mandate. Today is the day that a new Prime Minister has been elected, and today is the day to wish him all the best, and to hopefully he will look after the interest of this country.
So, Saloni Saraf, we watched here in France as the Congress Party hammered on the campaign trail about the Rafale plane scandal, about whether or not there were some dodgy side deals involving political friends of Narendra Modi for in the purchase of those French fighter jets. That seems to have backfired miserably. The talking about corruption.
I think it's incredibly unsurprising about the BJP's landslide victory, because if anything, it just shows us how polarized the country actually is, and how the election was not fought on jobs or economy or development like it was in 2014. It was fought on this concept of nationalism, on uniting the country because of one religion. And when it comes to the question about corruption, I think the BJP has showed us very clearly what their stand on that is. In 2005, the UPA instituted the Right to Information Act, which was a revolution for holding power to account, where anybody could ask about for the government to give them documents for whatever they needed. And the political downfall of Congress in 2014 was very much due to a lot of the exposés that happened because of the RTI Act. And the BJP, ever since 2014, has done everything in its power to stop or reduce the Right to Information Act by denying permissions, by changing the law itself. Currently, there are 26,000 queries pending, and this was no other. So I think it's pretty clear what the BJP's stance is in terms of corruption.
When it comes in terms of corruption, you have just released a documentary called The Saffron Republic, and in it you say that independent institutions have been undermined. India's democracy is not as strong as it was in 2014?
Yes, 100%. Every democracy has three institutions that must remain independent. You have the media, you have education, and you have the judiciary system. Each of these institutions has been broken down from the inside by the BJP. They are infiltrating university campuses. They are putting like-minded RSS Hindu nationalists in charge of independent education institutions and completely ruining the rights of the minority students. One of the case studies in my documentary was that of Rohit Vemula, a Dalit PhD student who committed suicide because of who he was, because of his identity. And that's not okay. In terms of education, journalists every day are getting threats in India just because they speak up for what is right. Being a journalist in India, your fundamental right is to be able to speak up against authority. And if simple dissent is being silenced, then I think we're touching upon a very dangerous fascist dictatorship.
All right. Before I go to Michael Kugelman in Washington, I see that Pradeep Singh is shaking his head.
Well, I was shaking my head for a simple reason. that, look, as Neela pointed out earlier, you have about 80% of Hindus in India. But there are two things that are happening here. One is that Modi, on one hand, is conveying the identity of this nation, national civilization, which is going back thousands of years. So he identifies with that historical narrative, and he is not afraid to project it. So this is one thing which is going on in terms of his religious identity or civilizational identity, rather. That is number one. Number two, what has happened in this particular election is, if you see the election of UP, which sends 80 seats, okay, BJP has actually done extremely well because they have cut through the caste fault lines also. So they are uniting the country. And with all the economic steps that he has taken, like GST, etc., they are actually uniting the whole country. So
Right,
therefore,
let me put that to Michael Kugun.
Yeah, sure, we'll come back on this.
We have to come.
Right,
We have to go to the break.
because
Do
this
you,
is,
do you agree with that, Michael Kugelman, that Narendra Modi's been able to reach beyond his core base, or do you agree more with what you heard from Saloni, which is that India's democracy is a little bit less of what it was a few years back?
Well, I'll say what's the diplomatic response, and I also think it's the accurate response, and that's that both of those explanations are correct. I mean, let's be very clear that in the 2014 election, when Modi was elected the first time, the BJP did get a fair number of Muslim voters, and of course we haven't seen the data for this last election, but I'm sure that we'll see some of the same. But that said, I mean, let's be very clear that this idea of Hindutva or Hindu nationalism, we've heard this for quite some time. This is not the first time that we've had discussions about this issue, but I would argue that the BJP over the last 5 years has arguably gone further than any other previous government to really articulate that ideology in a very emphatic way, which has then understandably yielded some very divisive rhetoric and also some very toxic and hateful rhetoric. I think that's impossible to deny. But certainly, the BJP could not have won with the margin that it did without cutting across its traditional, or without going beyond its traditional base. And I think that's very clear. It won large mandates, not just in areas of its traditional strength, but areas of the East in India, where it historically hasn't been as strong. It won there as well. So clearly, I think both of these ideas have some truth to them.
All right, we're going to pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. And Narendra Modi in India has, just experienced the opposite of incumbent fatigue. The biggest margin of victory for a sitting prime minister since Indira Gandhi in 1971. We're talking about it with France 24's Leela Jacinto. Welcome back to Pradeep Singh, BJP supporter based here in Paris. From London, journalist and documentary filmmaker Saloni Saraf. And we welcome back from Washington, Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director of the Wilson Center's Asia program. Michael, just before the break, you were talking about Modi reaching beyond his base. And again, it's people around the globe hear this. The allure of the charismatic strongman who has a strong footing in identity politics. Why in India, though?
Well, I think there are a variety of reasons. One is that there simply is no other alternative. There really is no leader that is nearly as strong and certainly not as popular as Modi. I think we could talk about all the reasons why the BJP won by such a large margin. One reason is that the opposition simply could not muster a potent opposition coalition to push back against the BJP wave. And you look at Rahul Gandhi, the head of the Congress party, who in my view has never really looked particularly comfortable in his role as the heir to a political dynasty in India. And we saw that, there had been a period some months ago when the Congress was enjoying some momentum, when the Congress party won a few state elections, when the BJP found itself increasingly on the defensive with all these revelations about high unemployment figures. But I think that that Rahul Gandhi is he just cannot compare in any way to Modi in terms of charisma or anything like that. And there really isn't anyone else. I think that is one factor. And of course, at the same time, you have to give credit to Modi, who simply has been able to captivate the population on a big level and tap in to a lot of sentiment, to tap into the sentiment held by a significant proportion of the population related to these ideas of Hindu nationalism. So there's that for sure. I think that really is the bottom line. This election was a referendum, among other things, on Modi's popularity. And we've seen that despite all the other things, all the concerns, the vulnerabilities of the BJP, his popularity was really one of the big reasons, not the only reason, one of the big reasons why it was able to win with the margin it did, coupled with the very weak campaign carried out by the opposition and the lack of a strong leader representing the opposition in India.
Saloni Saraf, you're sitting in London where EU elections are happening, and if the polls prove right, the mainstream traditional blocs, the Labour Party, the Conservatives, are set to take a drubbing. In India, why is the Congress in such a tailspin?
I think just to add to what he was saying, a huge reason why India has won, why the BJP has won by such a landslide is their absolute propaganda. I think it's really important to note that the one thing the BJP did right was propaganda. In India, most passive news is propaganda, and the way that they went about that was by using WhatsApp. So every day there are hundreds and thousands of groups where there are forwards being sent on people's WhatsApp groups with just fake information about the BJP. You can go to rural India and meet someone who doesn't even have electricity but has a smartphone with 4G, and every morning their phone is flooded with pro-BJP fake statistics. And people will buy into that, because that is the news that they are receiving. And it is sad that we are ignoring these statistics of high unemployment rates and farmer suicides, which have increased by 50% since the BJP have come back into power, and just going by somebody's charisma. I think that's a little bit sad. And with regards to the election itself, I think it's so interesting to see how it was fought more like a presidential campaign. People were not voting for the BJP, they were voting for Modi. But by putting someone like Modi at the front lines, you've also brought someone like Pragya Thakur in Bhopal, who is a terrorist out on bail, who literally in interviews proudly stands there and says, yes, I was part of the team that broke down the Babri Masjid. And I think that's quite dangerous, that you're putting these kind of people at the forefronts of society. And I think this whole concept of if not Modi, then who, this perspective kind of needs to be altered a bit, because that's not the point. This is about like human fundamental rights, that just because there isn't an alternative, it doesn't mean that you do not speak up and hold power to justice. Just because you feel like there isn't another alternative, it doesn't mean that you allow Modi and Amit Shah, two dictators, to stand there and support hate crime, mob lynching, and make the life of all minorities in India extremely difficult.
Leela Jacinto.
Well, to give international viewers some context to this, Saloni is totally right. What she's talking about, the fake news, the silencing of the media. The Indian media scene is very raucous and very noisy, but that doesn't mean it's really independent or not pro-BJP or fair. But what Saloni is really referring to is in the 5 years of Modi, the red lines have been destroyed.
Hang on. Let's talk about this.
Okay.
There's on the one hand, what I don't speak Hindi, so I just see the English-speaking press. You see all points of view in India. It's got a thriving independent press.
Well, you don't see the Indian press. First and foremost, what we are seeing is the English media.
Right.
Now, the English media, the media suppression works very subtly. If you investigate a story of Modi's links to an industrialist like Ambani, for instance, your news organization will be slapped by a lawsuit. You may lose your job. It's much more subtle. What we are not seeing is in the vast non-English press. What in India India is called the vernacular press. A lot of that press, especially in the Hindi belt, is absolutely pro-BJP. And what is happening in the discourse in the mass media as well as in social media, which is absolutely not, it's not monitored despite what WhatsApp and all these groups try. But what you are seeing in the media is the normalization of the red lines that were once in India. 5 years of literally reducing the populace's sensitivity to atrocities, where you can reach a stage where somebody who is charged with terrorism not only stands and gets a candidacy, she wins an election. So what we are seeing right now is a complete breakdown of the old red lines. And now we have an administration that has been given a second mandate with a threadbare opposition. So, this Hindutva ideology, which goes back decades, but it picked up steam in the 2014 elections. And just one more thing for international audiences, which they do not, probably don't understand. When we're talking about Hindutva, Hindu nationalism, right? It's a vast network. It's called the Sangh Parivar, the family. The BJP is a political party of it, but this is absolutely a vast network. They have tens of thousands of branches. It's a voluntary organization. The members runs into millions. So it has seeped into the body politic. It has changed the discourse. And so when Modi talks about a new India, this is indeed a new India. This is being built on the embers of, the Congress party, which really is a big story because, this is a party, a national freedom party, which is in complete shambles now. We don't even know what's the future of this party.
Pradeep Singh?
3 points. One is, if Modi is very strong and if Modi is extremely popular, it's not his fault. Number one, okay? Because he's in politics to win election and to run the country. That is number one. Secondly, the opposition has become so disunited and disjointed in last few years, and Congress itself has no cadre. They were in power for 50, 55 years. They did not build any cadre to the grassroots level. And they remain governed by a few family members. In fact, we saw in this election, when Rahul wants help, I shouldn't be taking names, but when he wants help, he calls his sister or he calls his mother. So there is very little of the party organization. So this is number one, why the Congress or the opposition does not have a cadre. Number two, the English media that you talked about, Leela, is actually highly polarized because in this election, there has been a section of English media, forget the vernacular, the English media, which has got so polarized that they have gone to canvass for some candidates who are basically Modi haters. And they are openly confessing. So I say, what kind of a journalist are you if you are so biased against and so on and so forth?
But would you agree with Leela that India has become more intolerant over the last 5 years?
I really wouldn't say that, Francois, for a simple reason, that before 2014, before Modi came, okay, lot of things were happening in the country. There were communal rights in India of real massive sizes during Congress rule, okay?
Or like in Gujarat, when Modi was the chief minister.
So I don't deny that.
Right.
What I'm saying is, there were much bigger riots that happened in Assam. 3,500 people massacred way back in 70s. 3,500 Sikhs massacred in Delhi in 1984. Okay, there have been much bigger massacres on the watch of Congress. Okay, but there was never this kind of international condemnation on a sustained basis as we have now for sporadic incidents that do take place, which are condemnable. I don't deny that.
But you have a rhetoric which is surprising. When the president of the BJP at a rally in the east of the country likens illegal migrants from Bangladesh, who happen to be Muslim, by the way, to termites, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I would not accept that term. I do agree there. But when we pass a judgment, we have to be aware of the historicity of that area. Okay? Over a period of 70 years, ever since independence, there has been a huge amount of illegal migration from Bangladesh, which has actually changed the entire demography of the state. and which has influenced the political voting patterns in the state to the extent that in many constituencies, the majority community was not even allowed to vote. Up to 30% of majority community voters in some particular constituencies were not even allowed to vote. Okay, these are realities that actually never come to the fore. So that's why an impression builds up that the intolerance has gone up in last 5 years. That is not necessarily the case.
Saloni Saraf?
Can I just say something about intolerance here? We're talking about how this government has normalized intolerance towards minorities. We're talking about someone who on social media follows, not just is silent, actively follows Hindutva extremists who troll and give death threats and rape threats to activists and journalists on a daily basis. I released my film, the trailer of which was released on a Friday evening, so it would have been very late in India. I started getting trolled on Twitter at 9 a.m. on a Monday. Like, you can just see that these people have been hired, and these people come in the thousands, and that is so dangerous. When we're talking about intolerance, I want to bring up the concept of cow vigilantes. Now, in India, the cow in Hinduism is seen as something that is an animal that is very sacred. But the Hindutva, which is very, very different to Hinduism, I want to emphasize, the Hindutva is right-wing extremist Hinduism, has taken it so far that Muslims who are transporting cattle for dairy purposes are lynched and murdered on the streets. And then when those people who lynched and murdered those the minority men go to jail, they are then bailed out and garlanded by BJP MPs. And those videos are celebrated on social media. Since 2014, there have been over 50 2015 even, there have been over 50 lynching cases in over 11 states in India. And I think that is a very dangerous normalization of intolerance. I don't think that's okay. And I don't think that you can justify that or say that it's okay because it's less than what happened before. Nobody's denying that the state that India is in right now, Congress has had a role to play in that. Nobody's denying that. But what the BJP has done that the Congress has not done, perhaps even by accident, is use liberal spaces to destroy liberalism with an intense intolerance towards anybody that is not an upper caste Hindu.
All right, unfortunately, the clock is working against us because we could talk about this subject for hours. But I do want to talk about foreign policy for a moment. Among the array of foreign leaders who've congratulated Modi this Thursday, the Prime Minister of neighboring Pakistan, Imran Khan, sending out a tweet. I congratulate Prime Minister Modi on the electoral victory of the BJP and its allies. Look forward to working with him for peace, progress, and prosperity in South Asia. Now, his message came just hours after Pakistan's military said it tested a surface-to-surface ballistic missile capable of carrying conventional and nuclear warheads, landed in the sea. On Wednesday, India, the day before, claiming its military had test-fired a BrahMos missile, the world's fastest. The standoff between nuclear-armed neighbors comes amid the spike in tension that followed the February suicide attack on a paramilitary convoy in Srinagar that killed 40 Indian security personnel outside Kashmir's summer capital. When you look at that congratulatory tweet, Michael Kugelman, do you take it at face value?
Well, not too long ago, a few weeks ago, Prime Minister Imran Khan in Pakistan, in a press exchange with foreign reporters in Pakistan, he said that he actually thought the best chances of peace with India lie with Narendra Modi and the BJP, which was quite striking. I think
why
it's
did he say that?
Question to think about what's going to become. Why do I? Well, I think that. Well, who knows why he said that? My own view is that the Pakistanis would be very interested in having a better relationship with India, only to the point that they can start engaging in a dialogue with India and only because of the Pakistanis' desire to start discussing the issue of Kashmir, which of course is the fraught region that has led to the two countries fighting multiple wars. And India, of course, and particularly the BJP and the government that will be taking office in the coming days, has said that's off the table. So I don't think we should read too closely into these conciliatory comments coming from Imran Khan and from his tweets, other than to be diplomatic. I mean, President Trump not too long ago issued a congratulatory tweet to Modi, which of course is rooted in something real, and that the U.S.-India partnership is very deep. I think that when Modi came to office in 2014, he very quickly extended an olive branch to the Pakistani Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, at the time, and he invited him to his inauguration. But soon after that, the relationship got worse. I think at this point, things are different. Emotions are still quite raw from the near war between India and Pakistan several months back. So I don't think that this government is going to be in any hurry to engage in conciliatory messaging toward the Pakistanis. I think that there may be some efforts in the coming weeks and months to try to resume dialogue, but I really don't think, the BJP has made it quite clear that hard line on Pakistan is a big part of its policy. It campaigned hard against Pakistan on the campaign trail. That's going to remain in place. So I think that despite this nice sounding tweet coming from Imran Khan, I don't think we should assume that the relationship between these two fraught rivals is going to improve anytime soon.
Leela Jacinto, when you're the Prime Minister of India and you've just won by a landslide, how do you handle Pakistan?
Well, in 2014, the logic, what some people were saying, was like, since there is a hardline Hindu party, maybe this is the government that could bring peace with Pakistan in a way that a weaker Congress couldn't. That did not happen in the 5 years that Modi was in power, because the BJP has now perfected its equation of how to win elections, and dialogue with Pakistan is not part of it. On the subject of Kashmir, I just want to very quickly bring up something because it's very important. Now, on the BJP manifesto, it includes making constitutional changes in Kashmir, and this is something that is going to be something to really watch for in the second term. There is an article, it's Article 370, which gives Kashmir, the state of Jammu and Kashmir, special autonomy. This is all part of the complicated way in which the state came into independent India. This is a contested territory. There is another article in the Constitution, which is 35A, which has sort of territorial integrity to Kashmir. So if you are not a Kashmiri, you cannot own property and you cannot vote from Kashmir. And people in Kashmir, and the BJP has called to scrap that. People in Kashmir talk about demographic terrorism. In effect, by scrapping that, what they fear, what will happen in Kashmir is basically what China does in Tibet, which is, it takes out the cultural autonomy of it. So, Kashmir is going to turn even more fraught in the next 5 years. And I really don't think that, I think what will happen with India and Pakistan is it'll be back to business as usual. Pakistan cannot cross the line too much. It needs an IMF loan, so it has to really pull back from being extreme. India will also have international intervention because they are two nuclear-powered nations. So we will see this escalation, de-escalation, near war coming to skirmishes. But the Kashmir issue is not going to be resolved.
The Kashmir issue, go ahead, Saloni Saraf.
I just wanted to say something about Pakistan. I think that especially in this election, in most elections, Pakistan is almost like a trump card that the BJP has exploited very well by showing their hard stance on it with the Pulwama attacks and the Ballots strikes, showing that they've painted Modi as this brand who is the only one who can give Pakistan a fitting reply and who's the only one who can save India from the evil terrorists in Pakistan. And that has really tugged on the patriotic strings of the everyday person in India, because this is something that is a very real issue that still exists in most Hindu households. And I think playing on that, even in propaganda, there was a Bollywood movie, a mainstream Bollywood movie that was released on one of these attacks that really pulled at people's patriotic strings. And I think that was only released a couple months ago. And I think that is a huge thing that they've really put forward in this election.
All right, we'll see how that plays out. But Pradeep Singh, what I want to ask you about is you heard Michael Kugelman mention the warming of relations between the United States and India, and right now we're in the midst of this tense trade standoff between the U.S. and China. With the Huawei ban, which has now been suspended for 90 days, it could get tenser. Where does India lie in all of this?
Well, India's line is that in an overall sense, it should open up doors for India. Michael will know that sometime in June, I think there are about 200 U.S. companies who are traveling to India as part of the U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce. And the goal is to set up manufacturing units in India. And many of these companies would actually start moving out of China, partly or totally, in view of the tense relationship between U.S. and China. So I think India would try to take advantage of this situation between the two countries, and I think that's a normal, logical thing.
And how do you feel when Donald Trump says don't buy Iranian oil, which is something that India does?
Well, I mean, that's part of his own politics, and there is nothing that India can do to stand up to U.S. But I think the back channel negotiations have created a situation where we are getting more oil from Saudi, and we are also buying oil from U.S. So this is how the shortfall would be made up.
Michael Kugelman, your thoughts on that relationship between India and the United States, especially with an eye towards China?
Well, I mean, really, since the early 90s, the U.S.-India relationship has been on a very positive trajectory, and it really accelerated and strengthened over the last 5 years, over the course of the BJP. So I know that here in Washington, those that focus on India are very happy, and they're very positive, and they assume that the relationship will get even better because Modi clearly has an interest in making the relationship work, and Trump administration has worked with Modi, so I think you can assume that there'll be continuity in U.S.-India relations.
Continuity in U.S.-India relations, but the United States doesn't have a common border with China.
Well, no, of course. No, this is true. And I should say, I don't want to overstate the strength of the U.S.-India relationship. We talk about this U.S.-China trade dispute, and the U.S. and India have problems on the trade side as well. I'd argue that there's some significant tensions on the commercial side of the U.S.-India relationship, which have actually gotten fairly worse over the last few months. And as strong as the U.S.-India relationship is, it's really dominated by the defense and security side. You know, the economic side has always been an Achilles heel. And I do think that one of the priorities for the U.S. and India, once the new government in India has settled in, is for the two sides to try to sit down on high levels and figure out how to move forward on the trade side so that the overall strength of the partnership does not get undercut.
One thing is for certain, Leela Jacinta, the old days when India was this champion of the non-aligned movement, the days of the Cold War, that's long gone.
Well, the non-aligned movement was a very good idea from the start, but never quite really worked out. But I think what's interesting is the Congress, is the fall of the Congress, and I think we're going to probably hear from Rahul Gandhi or Congress leaders of what is going to happen to this party. You know, I mean, the Indian National Congress is like the African National Congress. These are the big political parties that won independence of these post-colonial countries. So, non-alignment, the old Nehru vision, it seems like, 2019 is just buried all that.
All right, the page has indeed turned. We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you, Leela Jacinta. I want to thank Pradeep Singh, Saloni Saraf for being with us from London, and
Thank
Michael
you.
Kugelman in Washington. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.